I'm really excited to be your moderator for this very important discussion about Canada's productivity crisis, our country's innovation potential and global competitiveness. We all know that the Bank of Canada is warning us that we are facing a productivity crisis after falling behind other countries for many years. It was quite stark language that we heard from the Bank of Canada in recent months. It made everyone in our newsrooms just stand up and pay attention. So we need to solve this problem, and I think everyone in the room knows why. It's because it's making us collectively poorer the longer it goes unaddressed. So I have an all-star panel here to discuss this very important issues. We're going to discuss the root causes, but as Helly mentioned, we are going to talk about potential solutions. So we're really hoping that this is going to be a constructive conversation. I'm going to introduce our panelists. At the end, we have John Belton, Director of Human Resources and Industrial Relations at Bombardier. And then we have Charles Deguire, CEO and founder of Kinova. And Jason Myers is right here, CEO of Engine. Gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss, so we're going to jump right in. We've heard about the global trends. With those in mind, in your opinion, does Canada have a productivity crisis? And if so, what are the root causes of this problem? And, let's just start from there. Let's just to lay the groundwork. Do you want to go first, John?
Yeah. Would I say it's a productivity crisis? Probably not. Do we have extreme challenges? Yes. And I think when you go to the question of productivity and when it's raised by government or if it's raised by private industry, it always kind of centers back to these same systemic problems, these same systemic issues that we face, which is, we have an over-reliance on a cheap dollar, which makes our products quite attractive at a base level without necessarily having to invest a lot of money into innovation and productivity. Over-reliance on raw products. And so, in my mind, it's just coming back to the same questions, the same issues, time over time. And so I'll... Yep.
Thank you for that. And again, we can get all of the statistics out on productivity, and I think everybody's read them. I don't think anybody here doubt that there's an issue and that we can do better in productivity, so we won't hammer that bigger. But the thing that is worrying is that the difference with the US is getting bigger. So the direction is bad. So I'll just put it there. We're not going in the right direction. I'm going to be the optimistic later on in the talk, but for the moment, let's just say the trend is not going in the direction we hope it would be.
Yeah, does Canada have a productivity crisis? Sure. Okay, so now we've got a burning platform. How do we exploit that? But I agree, we've got some pretty important challenges. Does every company in this room have a productivity challenge? Of course. It's all about creating value. It's all about, for customers, it's all about generating greater efficiency, and it's all about growth. So when I look at productivity, there are a couple of things like, there's a difference between Canadian productivity and the productivity of a particular sector or a particular industry. So let's take a look at manufacturing. We start analysis usually in 1980, and over the first 10 years from 2000. So from 2000 to 2010, productivity in Canadian manufacturing grew by about 7%. It was up by about 74% in the United States. So huge difference. What if we had started in 2010 and looked at what's happened over the last 12 years? Well, Canadian productivity in manufacturing, the way that Bank of Canada measures it, we'll get back to measurement in a minute, has been growing at more than twice the rate of US productivity in manufacturing. We don't hear that And we don't, so I think we need to understand what we're really talking about here, the level of analysis, but what productivity really is, which is the value that's created by an economy. From a business sense, it's the difference between your sales and change in inventory and the cost of inputs. So what we're really talking about is labor compensation and profit. And we tend to think about how do you boost productivity, labor productivity? Well, that's all about cutting labor costs. It's exactly the opposite. You don't boost productivity if you're not paying people more. And usually that means you're making more money at the same time. So I think we just need to take a very close look at this. There are three ways of generating more productivity. You grow the value of your services, so your customers are paying more, number one, or you cut cost, you become more efficient per unit of output. But the third thing is that you grow the highest value creating parts of your economy. And that's where I think we need to put a lot more focus. How do we grow the highest value parts of our economy, not trying to grow the least value, those sectors with the smallest margins? How do we take a look at where value is being created and focus on that? And that's where I think the discussions today are so important.
I just want to pick up on one of the points that you raised, how we measure productivity. What are the correct measures of this? Should we be looking beyond gross domestic product per hour worked? Why don't we stick with you, Jay?
Well, the Bank of Canada and everybody else, all the economists, and I'm an economist, by the way, so sorry. They measure productivity, labor productivity, in terms of real GDP per hour worked. Real GDP is supposed to reflect the volume of output. And there are a lot of problems with that. Number one, I'm sure everybody in this room knows how to calculate real GDP. And I tell you, no business does. So businesses are looking at the income statements here. So according to the Bank of Canada, we're not very productive. But if you compare an average operating statement in US manufacturing versus Canadian manufacturing, Canadian manufacturers are more profitable at the gross margin, at before-tax profits, and at after-tax profits. So how can you be more profitable and less productive? And a very large part of that is because the calculation of real GDP is focusing on volume of product out the door. It's not focused on the value of the product out the door. And it doesn't take into consideration that a quarter of today's revenue earned by manufacturers are services. It doesn't measure that, it just measures product. So additional service income, whether that's leasing or a higher value product or simply the services provided today by the fact that every product, every piece of equipment is a data platform, that's considered to be inflation, and that's not part of the real GDP calculation. Anyway, that's technical economic stuff, but I don't think we're measuring GDP correctly, or I don't think real GDP is a good measure of productivity. And from the point of view of manufacturing, if you look at the amount of value created, and just going back to that sales minus inputs, we create about 85% of what the US does. We talk about the dollar. Well, the dollar would have to be at 85 cents US for productivity measures to equalize. Manufacturers have no control over the dollar. If the dollar goes higher, if the dollar goes lower, that's not in the control of the companies that are operating. But if the dollar were at 85%, Canadian companies would be generating as much in US dollar terms as US companies are. So, I think we really, in a way, the productivity issue, maybe it's a burning platform, but let's get down to business. Let's focus on what generates customer value, what generates greater efficiency, and how do we grow the highest value creating, most profitable parts of the business.
John and Charles, do you have anything to add on how we should be thinking about this? Should we be rethinking the measures?
It's just interesting for me, and I'm not here to make a shameless plug for Bombardier, but when you shrink it down to the level that I work at in the company, everything that we're fixated on is about learning curve. And so if you just use the example of what we produce, we're constantly trying to refine all of our processes, whether it's internal, our training, our development, our supply chain, just to bring unit costs down. So that's an issue that every business really needs to struggle with, and we struggle with it because sometimes we don't do it particularly well. Sometimes we have new products that we're developing and we're putting into the market, but we have a lot of work to do as it relates to training and development. So.
Yeah, I'll be a bit more optimistic on that side. So the business leaders and the decision maker, I think they're making resource allocation where it makes sense for them. And you both discussed, there's the dollar strength that we have here just help us export more. So they will invest into exporting more. There's other opportunity to grow the profitability of a business or to expand a business. They will invest there. I think in the coming years, the more the robotic, the automation, the productivity tools become affordable and accessible, then resource allocation will continue to diverge to those sectors. So I'm not saying we have nothing to do, but the trend is already there. It's already happening. Robotic automation are getting more accessible. So resource allocation will follow through. And we should not sit on the fact that the Canadian dollar trades well, because it's going to bite us at some point. So the trend is going, on that sense, I think it's going in the right direction. And the decision leaders and the decision makers will continue to allocate properly. Like Bombardier is doing, investing more in automation at the moment, like many manufacturers you're saying are investing more and more. So there's some hope. We're seeing a turn of event there. On the other side, education, I think education is always the basis. Kids at school, we're doing demonstration in high school and they're talking to you about productivity. In high school, I was not talking about productivity, I can tell you that. It was not happening, but Prime Minister in Quebec is big on productivity. He's going on every platform saying, this is Quebec productivity, this is Ontario, this is the rest of Canada, this is the rest of the world, is educating everybody on terms that used to be only for economists. So this is great news. They're talking about it. Is it the right format? At least if they're talking about it, they can educate themselves. They can, be curious about it. They can learn about it, and then we'll have more sophisticated metrics in the future. But we're establishing a base discussion level between the politician, which I was not expecting them to be a bit advocate on that, but they're doing it, and even high school student today. So there's some hope there. Like the base level of understanding is growing.
That's all about improvement.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do know, however, that robot adoption rates in Canada are low relative to other places. Is that because Canadian industries don't need robots, or because they don't know how to implement them? Who wants to jump in? I'm looking at John.
Well, I think it's both. And again, if I use my own lived example, we implement robotic technology where we can, and then you face your limits. So there's a difference between trying to deploy additional robotics and automation in your current manufacturing operations versus whether or not you just bring it in at all, because it always comes down to the CapEx question and whether or not you have the ability or the desire to be able to invest in that technology. It's massively expensive, and robots are wonderful, but they also can sometimes be a nightmare to maintain. No strike against the individuals who we heard from earlier, but yeah, it's a challenge. So it's both.
Yeah, definitely. If I had to start a business in robotic tomorrow morning, I would not build a robot, I would use a robot. I think there's a big gap in Canada. There's a lot of demand to deploy robots, to integrate robot for industry-specific or application-specific. And you see it in the membership of the CRC, like it's growing. More integrators, more distributors are coming, are joining. More of them exist. The demand is there, the demand is strong, and it's growing. So we need to fix also this layer of important in the deployment of robots. Like people are not just studying to build robots, but people that are being expert at deploying those robots, servicing those robots. So those are different skill sets. You have multiple universities across Canada that now have bachelor degree in robotics. You have the technical level also that are more going into electromechanics, into robotic and automation. So we need this not only for PhD robotic, but we need for everybody robotic to use them. So this is a huge opportunities where I think it's going to help fix the gap. On the other side, there was an interesting statistic yesterday night from, I think it was BDC, who say 50% of the SME owners want to sell their business in the next 5 years. This is amazing. This is amazing because decision leaders, like decision makers and business owners, have a lot of influence on whether they will deploy automation or not. So then two things are going to happen. The business that do deploy automation and invest in their productivity, their multiple in valuation is going up. And you can see machine shop, the one that want to sell, like the typical baby boomers as a machine shop want to sell it. He's gonna have a few X multiple on his EBITDA. If he's deployed automation, there's gonna be a few more X on his multiple. He's gonna be a prime, target for acquisition. We've got very strong example in Quebec of those machine shops that were fully automated and went out for crazy valuation. Let that be an example for all of the others that are wondering, should I invest in automation if I want to sell in the next 5 years? So BDC, EDC, all the agency, we need to educate those business owners on the impact on their valuation. Like this is the going to cash for them. They've been building those business for 30 years. If you can add 2 or 3X to your business valuation because you do automation in the next 5 years, like do it. Like yes, there's a capital gain, 9% more, but if you add an X to your valuation, this 9% more, it's nothing. So we need to educate them. Not all of them will get into the bandwagon of saying, yeah, I want to invest. That's another good use. So today, 50% of them want to sell in the next 5 years. This screams consolidation. And consolidation, is the MBA solution to productivity. It's like, oh, we're not going to adopt technology. We're just going to consolidate them. Productivity is going to go up. We have a vast amount of SMEs in Quebec and Canada and coast to coast. A lot of them are going to sell in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to be able to build better medium-sized businesses. Those medium-sized businesses can sustain automation, investment in robotic, and can bring a different landscape to the economy. So again, today, if you want to have a good business plan, if you know well your industries, do a roll-up plan saying, I'm going to consolidate all of those folks that are not investing in automation, and I'm going to do, for those 5 businesses, invest in automation.
Jason, I want to ask you, what obstacles do businesses face when moving from the startup to the scale-up stage? And because we know that robots can help with that.
Right. Well, let me kind of continue the thought line here and get into that, because I think that what you're saying, Charles, is really 2 things that are very important. One of the structural differences in Canada with other economies is we don't have a lot of those mid-size growth companies. And so that's one reason why our adoption rates tend to be fairly low, because we have a disproportionate number of smaller companies. So that is an opportunity. The other thing about the higher multiple is it's not just about automation. If you are a company that has successfully automated, it says a lot about your people, about your management, about the fact that you are actually able to manage that automation. And I think going back to the first question, or the previous question, about how difficult is it for companies to adopt new technology, automation, there are a lot of issues around that. But if you ask someone like Bain or Accenture or Deloitte, they'll tell you that like 70 or 80% of major digital transformation projects fail. When we were surveying manufacturers right at the, about 4 years ago. 80% of the companies we surveyed said that they had actually invested in a technology in the previous 3 years, and they gave the business objectives. And then the question was, did you succeed in meeting your business objective? And 50% said no, and 15% said they didn't know. Maybe they didn't know what their business objectives were but they weren't measuring the outcome of that. And so, the management of this is so important. It's one thing to invest, but we all know that people have invested in automation solutions in the wrong part of their process, and that they didn't meet their business objective because it wasn't the right investment, or that they couldn't manage the investment because they didn't have the right data processes or the right, or they didn't integrate it with other types of technology that they needed to do that successfully. So. Anyway, going back to your question, Rita, about some of the problems in startups. Yeah, it's money, but it's also customers. And I was really, as far as the challenges that you presented there, money, resources, awareness, and talent. Same issues for everybody in this room. It is about money, but it's also about good management. And it's about finding, and it's about talent, but it's also finding that growth strategy. We talk about application in manufacturing. Application customers are slow in applying technology, and we often do think about, application technology is just simply to improve existing processes. And I love what Nipun said. You're improving a process that is inefficient right from the very beginning by automating it. So how do you rethink that issue in a solution and provide not only your customer with a solution, but enable your customer to provide their customer with a solution? And so be able to position your solution as an important part of that growth strategy. But then secondly, of course, how do you find on the manufacturing side, if this is a device, how do you scale up the production? And that for many companies is the big problem. How do you find the capital required to actually produce? Today, there's lots of money going into the R&D and the startup side. When it gets to the actual production scale-up side and the hard manufacturing, the hard capital side, that's where a lot of the problems exist.
So I have an uncomfortable question. How much of this is a business culture problem? Are we simply too risk averse in Canada?
Definitely, there's a portion of the culture, but again, that part I'm looking forward to the future. If 50% of the business owners are going to change in the next 5 years, high probability either they're, as I say, consolidated in a bigger group, or it's a new generation of business owner that's going to be there. So definitely it's part of the issue, I think. We've been comfortable, natural growth. We have the biggest market, just as neighbor. So things were good for us, but amazing opportunity. 50% of a group of culturally linked business owner will change in the next 5 years, or will try to change in the next 5 years. I'm 41 years old, high probability that the next generation of owners of those business or leaders of those business is part of my generation. And we were born with closer links to the technology. We were born with more automation and robotic. Not saying we cannot change the actual business owner, but sometimes it's just easier to start fresh with a new leader.
And one of the things that we talked about ourselves on the call preparing for this was the fact that it would be advantageous for us as a country if we saw more innovation through clusters, right? Yep. And so maybe that's something that tips towards business culture, but there's a little bit of a blind spot here in the country as it relates to organization of thought, right? And organization of effort in manufacturing.
Yeah, show me how it works.
Yeah.
And how I'm going to make money from it, which is really important. I guess the other the other thing too is in terms of business culture, why do we rank so highly when it comes to tech? And like if you look at the tech surveys, Canada is one of the least risk averse. We're a very entrepreneurial country in terms of tech startups, but then when it comes to the actual application by existing, not just industry, not just manufacturing, but every sector of the economy, we become so risk averse here. So there has to be, like, how do we bridge that? How do we bridge that gap? And a lot of that is just by actually increasing the awareness of what the potential is here.
Okay, well, this is where we pivot the conversation. We've described the dynamics of the problem, so let's talk about the opportunities and solutions. What are the opportunities for Canada? Are there particular areas of robotics in which Canada is already excelling or is particularly suited to excel in the future? John, I'm going to start with you.
I'll just point to, I think, what's probably the most blatant example right now where government is actually becoming so active in attracting investment in battery technology, battery manufacturing, pouring billions of dollars of our hard-earned tax dollars into innovation in this sector. So, yeah, I look at, there's a huge space for government in terms of making this country the most attractive area for investment, whether that's capital investment, whether that's the attractiveness of being a destination for immigration, which we are. So yeah, there's from 40,000 feet, there's tons to be done.
Yeah.
That's just a few. So.
Yeah, and I'll continue on that. It helps the fact that John is here from Bombardier, but aerospace is notoriously not an early adopters of automation and robotic. That's the good news, because they have a lot to do. They've been waiting for you guys. Mm-hmm. They've been waiting for the solution to get there. And everybody's being hit by labor shortage, but aerospace is doing good. So in the next 10 years, for sure they'll need more robots. The service industries, like the food service industries, they're being hit quite hard at the moment. So we have the technology, we have the expertise. That's a good sector we can go in. We're in healthcare, and I saw folks from Synaptive also yesterday. Canada always been doing good in healthcare, and we care basically about people. It's a good place to recruit. So we have a few of those sectors where we already have some strength. Like in aerospace, we have Bombardier, Airbus, Pratt, Bell, Textron. I don't know the entire list, but there's their scale. Like you have massive world-class players that are here, and their research centers are here. So there's world-class opportunity. Also, most of manufacturers, we say it every year, but there's new face every year. We're all 90% plus export. I saw Mecademic, I saw Auto, ClearPath, us, Robotic, Vention. We're all 95% plus export. It was interesting to see the numbers of export in Denmark and in Odense. 50% is good, but we're at 95%, and this is strong. Like when we will benchmark ourselves with other region, people don't realize how strong that is. Like entire countries will fight, will invest billions of dollars for their industries to export more. We're already top exporter. We were forced to be top exporter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was. But today we have that as a strength, and we're all worldwide company. Nobody's launching a company in Canada saying, I'm going to sell in Canada. It's not happening. Like this is part of our culture, and this is a good part of our culture.
Listen, you had some good examples on our prep call of companies that had successfully invested for productivity. I mean, those types of illustrative examples, I think, would be very useful to people here. I mean, maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. Well, and I've got a lot of project partners in this room who can speak to their own either their applications or their solutions. I can point out Magna, and I can point out some of the other companies that have adopted some of these solutions. But I think there are a couple of key similarities in terms of successful adoption. One is either there's a labor shortage that's acute, or simply that these jobs are just not jobs for people. And right now, sustainable resource extraction and processing tied to critical minerals and batteries is really key. We've got see a number of companies that are using remote sensing, remote robotics. We've got a group of companies that are focusing on the development of robotic applications for mining on the moon that can be repurposed back to mining operations here at Earth and manufacturing operations. It's all about autonomous, miniaturized robotics there. And not that I want to call out a lot of companies, but the Canadian Space Mining Corporation is one of the leaders in that area. We've got in areas like healthcare, for instance, other operation. The nuclear industry is one large company, and of course, or one large sector of application where robotics is really the only solution to solving a lot of the issues around maintenance or around construction here. And we've got some great leading companies in the nuclear sector around that area. But just when it comes to going back to the point that it's not just about automating existing processes to make it work better. The deployment of robotics and automation at Dofasco in Hamilton to digitize their hot ladle steel production, because the people who could look into a vat of molten steel and tell them when it was ready to pour are all retiring. They needed something just about as good. But it wasn't just a robotics application. That meant sensors and material science and robotics and automation clearly, but also integration of sensors into existing systems there. So it was a very complex operation, but what they were able to do was kind of improve the efficiency of the process, the quality of the process, lead to a greener type of steel production. But it was really rethinking the entire process. It wasn't just plopping in a robot.
Okay, I want to ask John and Charles to answer this next question. Again, this is about practical learnings. Has your company made any mistakes when investing for productivity? And if so, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I think you see mistakes made, but the learning sometimes that the byproduct of those mistakes are the things that you take advantage of. So when I look at the challenges that we've faced in terms of implementing manufacturing systems and how you integrate your manufacturing systems together, only to find out that you turned the wrong direction, right? And then you have to reinvest, and then that creates a whole other issue around retraining and redevelopment of product and that sort of thing. So, I've seen that occur in our own manufacturing environment, but typically the things that come out of the other side of that only help us refine our processes that much more. So. I don't know if I landed directly on your question, but there's unoccupied space, I think, in any company, whether it's a manufacturing company, an R&D company, on just employee development and training is such a massive undertaking for a company like Bombardier every day. It doesn't stop. Everything associated to continuous improvement, that's one whole sector of innovation that kind of goes unmined, and we just focus on it so eagerly, right? Around continuous improvement and adopting processes like Kaizen and things like that in manufacturing. But yeah. So.
Yeah, the continuous part of it, I think it's one of our biggest learning at Kinova. So we've deployed plenty of digital tool, very little automation, but Industry 4.0 is going. And sometimes we had quite a big success quite fast. We were a robotician applying digital automation to our system was just going good. And because it was going good so fast, so well, we potentially underinvested in continuous training and continuous development of those platforms. That's a huge mistake on our part. We're fixing that now. But again, allocating budget on the long term, you have whatever new tools, new capacity in your business, making sure that not just the launch project, but year after year, you keep investing in it. Those are good dollars. Those are good investment. And as John mentioned, investing in your people. Like we've done a lot. We will never do enough. Each time we develop somebody at Kinova that is knowledgeable about robotic, even when they move to another companies, we've built a champion on robotic. So I used to be upset when people were leaving when we were a smaller company. I'm like, yeah, I generated another robotic champion. I'm not embracing it yet, so I don't like see any of you poking my people, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there where it's good for the community. We need to see that. I saw in the video of Audence, like they're exchanging people. We're not there yet, but we're seeding the champion of automation in our factory. And as much as we can invest, if all of the ecosystem, if all of the industries we invest in our people, then it's going to be better for everybody. So we, as business, we need to invest more in our people.
Okay, we have less than 5 minutes left. I want to make sure that there is time for at least one audience question. But before we do that, a speed round. Okay, so really quickly, how do we create a sense of urgency around this issue and incentivize companies of all sizes to invest? What is your top tip? Just 20 seconds each of you, because we want to make sure that the audience gets a chance.
I think a robotics strategy needs to be very focused on some key issues. Is it the issue about commercialization and growth and expansion internationally? Is it an issue about trying to help companies adopt technology, or is it an issue of scaling up production here in Canada? And I'm not saying these are different, but each of them require different types of solutions, and that to me begins the discussion about what that strategy should be like.
Very good. We need to multiply the champions of robotic. So if you're a business owner, onboard new leaders that are digital native, empower them to have clear metrics on automation. If you are a researcher in research, consider fractional CTO, fractional leader in a business. We need more of those collaboration. Leave some space to other teachers to grow up, and please come join. If you're in a government agency, this consolidation play, it's a big thing, but incentivize the movement of leader. And really, this is what is going to make happen. So we have all been doing good in our job. We need to let other people take those positions, and we need to scale up. So if you're also a business owner, congrats to the nice move of ClearPath and Otto. They brought Rockwell in our ecosystem. This is big. But those guys also are becoming investors. And this is a natural path. We saw the story of Audence. One company's acquired by Teradyne came in, acquired other companies, invested in the ecosystem. I don't think that Audence would be what it is today if a significant player didn't came like that. And the investors it create, most of our business is with Silicon Valley. 50% of my revenues come from Silicon Valleys. And there's a mafia. Each time one of those companies sell to another, they create 10 other companies, and they invest in those companies. So we need to embrace that part of the natural evolution and build our ecosystem in the next 5 years.
It's very simple for me. I don't think we have an issue here in Canada around our expertise when it comes to the development of robotic technology and manufacturing technology. For me, I think it's just making sure that the next generation that's coming up behind us are engaged. I think there's a lot of space that we need to occupy when it comes to the youth here in the country, and making sure that there's an attractive pathway for curious minds to come up and learn.
All right, do we have any questions for our panel from the audience? We have time for, yes, one question that goes to you.
This is just a statement, or more of a statement than a question, but I really appreciated what Jason said about, we don't really do we really have a risk-taking problem here? Everyone talks about Canadians don't take risks, and yet so many Canadians took risks to come to this country, and so many Canadians are starting companies or taking risks in science and stuff like that. So maybe we shouldn't be talking about that as much anymore. And maybe it's something else, because I really do agree that we don't have a cultural issue with taking risks. There's other factors at play. So not a question, but a substantial thank you, Jason.
Anybody else in the audience have a question? There's one back there.
Hi, Ahmed from Siemens here. Jason, Charles mentioned something important about the exports. He says we should be proud that most of our production, or maybe 90, you mentioned 90% maybe production. I think 75% of it is going to the US. So my question is, how can we, because that is good, but at the same time, that's very risky if you have one importer from you. So how can we I don't know if that's the right word. How can we minimize the risk of political change in the US affecting our production here locally? To anyone that would like to answer this. Yeah.
That's a fabulous question.
Well, I just say the U.S. has always been easy, so that's the natural way to do it. Maybe not as easy, in the future, but Canadian companies on the tech sector, robotics sector, have some of the best capabilities in the world. Often we are very humble about that. Canadians don't know what capabilities we have. So I just say, join us at Hanover 2025, biggest industrial fair in the world. Canada's the partner country. Let's blow our horn. Let's celebrate and let's showcase some of the great robotic capabilities we have to an international business audience. That's a good start.
And I think another good option, U.S. big market for all of us. Europe is the second next market for most of us. So, launch a new office in Odense. You're going to be, next door to your second biggest market. And I think this is really the future. So no pun intended, we add those guys here, but that's actually having boots on the ground in the other markets is the way to go.
I'm just an HR guy, so I'll defer to these gentlemen on that question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a great point, because one of the things that I hear a lot from European officials is that Canadian companies have not taken advantage of the CETA agreement with Europe, with the European Union, and the European companies are coming here, but we haven't taken full advantage. So I think that's a great point to end on. Okay, folks, we're going to have to leave the conversation there because we are out of time. I want to thank our entire panel for offering their insights and their frank talk about this very important issue, but most importantly for providing solutions. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Good job.
Thank you, guys.
Very nice to meet you.
Thanks, Rita.